everyone, I'm Arlene Dickinson. Thanks for joining me on my podcast. It's absolutely critical that we support small business in Canada, and I am proud of my partnership with TELUS, who always puts owners first. This October, TELUS is celebrating Small Business Month by supporting owners with special savings. Get the latest tech to help transform your business with limited time offers. Visit TELUS.com/Small Business Month to learn more. Let's all support small business and continue to stand with owners.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Reinvention. Today, Arlene chats with Harley Finkelstein, president of the tech giant Shopify. Known for helping so many entrepreneurs around the world with their e-commerce needs, Shopify is not the only tie Harley has to entrepreneurs. His first taste of entrepreneurship started at the young age of 13, where he decided he wanted to become a DJ. Harley shares that when every DJ company turned him down for lacking experience or being too young, he took matters into his own hands and started his own company. The valuable experience and knowledge he gained from that one situation was applied so many times later in his life, making failure a lesson and bringing him to his current state.
Harley, it is really nice to see you again. You have done so much since we last spoke to each other, which was now a couple of years ago. And you were at the time just in the middle of kind of rebuilding and not rebuilding, just building Shopify into the powerhouse Canadian company it is today with global customers. And it's just so impressive what you've done there. But we'll come to Shopify in a minute. I'd love to just chat a little bit. The podcast that we have here is obviously on Reinvention, and we love to talk to people like yourself, really people who have invented themselves, reinvented themselves, and had been parts of businesses that are engaged in reinvention. And I was looking at, your background, and tell me a little bit about yourself, because I know like at 13, you were DJing at special events. From there to here, tell me the journey.
Well, let me first start by saying it's a great honor and a privilege to be on your podcast, Arlene. I self-identify as an entrepreneur, and I'll get to where that comes from in just a second. But I've always admired you as an entrepreneur. I think you are one of the great Canadian entrepreneurs, and you play the role of a role model and a mentor and advisor to so many of us that are in the thick of it right now. And so, on behalf of every Canadian entrepreneur, I want to say thank you for inspiring so many of us.
Oh, thanks.
My self-identity around entrepreneurship starts when I was 13. It was this incredible discovery, almost like an epiphany. When I was 13, I was born in Montreal, but I grew up in South Florida. And in both Montreal and in South Florida, when you're 13 years old and you're a Jewish kid like I was, you go to a lot of bar mitzvahs. Like everyone seems to have a bar mitzvah. Some are really lavish, but some are very, very basic. But at every one of those bar mitzvahs, I noticed there was this person sort of behind the curtain that was a DJ. And this DJ had this incredible, even if it wasn't a great DJ, had this incredible responsibility for creating culture that evening or that afternoon, creating vibe, creating energy. And I was enamored by this idea that there was this human being who was able to create energy from seemingly nothing. And so I decided after going to enough bar mitzvahs that I want to be a DJ. And right. I was just like, what an amazing thing to be able to do. What a great superpower. The problem was, I've always looked, I'm not a tall person. I've never been tall. So I've always looked a little younger than I was. And I was a 13-year-old kid who looked like he was 10 years old, who had no DJ skills whatsoever, who wanted to be a DJ. And as I called around the various DJ companies that I knew or had heard of and said, hey, I'd like a job. Of course, I was met with no way. Or I was met with, do you have an experience? In which I would say no, and they would say no way. And so this discovery that I had, yeah, that's right. This discovery that I had was, wait a second, I can start my own DJ company and I can just hire myself. And that was really when the light bulb or the aha moment that I had, that entrepreneurship can be this amazing tool to solve lots of problems. And I ended up DJing like something in the neighborhood of 500 parties. I've recently sort of did the math on it. Between like 13 years old and 18 years old or 19 years old, did about 500 parties, weddings, bar mitzvahs, a couple club events, and made a bunch of money doing it, which was great. But I also recognized that this thing called entrepreneurship can be used in so many other ways. And that's kind of how I got started in entrepreneurship. I moved back from South Florida to Montreal when I was 17 to go to McGill. It was 2001. Parents lost everything. My dad was over leveraged, and it was a really, really bad time for my family. And Mom and Dad called me in September 2001, right after September 11th, when the markets kind of fell apart, and said, "You can stay in Montreal. You have to come back down to South Florida because we cannot afford to support you." Mm-hmm. And once again, I pulled out that tool out of my tool belt, which is entrepreneurship. And I said, I want to stay in Montreal. Not only do I want to stay here, I want to support myself, and I also want to help the family. I have two much younger sisters. That was important to me. And once again, I used entrepreneurship. I started a t-shirt company and made t-shirts for Canadian universities, and spent most of my undergrad not studying, but making t-shirts, or as they would say in the Montreal clothing industry, I was in the schmutta business. Mm-hmm. And once again, entrepreneurship was a tool that I utilized and leveraged to achieve a goal. At this point, it wasn't passion to DJ. It was supporting myself and my family.
So you're in law school at the time, though, correct? You were taking law?
I finished undergrad in 2005, and decided at that point, I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. The t-shirt business had made some money, real money. And a mentor of mine named Philip Reimer, who's still a very close friend, he was a mentor since I was a child, convinced me that I should go to law school, not to become a lawyer, but to become an entrepreneur. And which is very smart. And in hindsight, was the best advice I ever received in terms of education. And this particular mentor happened to be teaching law in 2005 for 1 year at the University of Ottawa. And he said, "Why don't you apply to the University of Ottawa, and you can go to get your law degree. We can spend time together." And I applied to one law school. Took the LSATs and did all that stuff, and applied to one law school, University of Ottawa, and got in, and moved to Ottawa in 2005. And that's when sort of my Shopify life kind of started, because I met Toby that year.
So that's I just want to pause for a moment, because you said something that I think listeners are going to be curious about. And I certainly am. And I know you kind of used it as a way into how you pulled out the tool of entrepreneurship, but when your family went through what it went through, and you're in school and you're trying to take care of them, how much pressure did you feel? Because, I think it's like, in hindsight, you said, well, I just pulled out this tool and I, just started a t-shirt company, and you make it sound like it was simple. But
highlight reel as opposed to the blooper reel I gave you.
Right. Yeah. Like, what's the underbelly of that? What was that like for you? I mean, that had to be really difficult.
The underbelly of that, and this is why you're you, because you know where to sort of double click, and it's the right place to double click if you want sort of the real, candid, honest version, which is that before I started this business in McGill, this t-shirt business, I tried to work and go to school. I worked at a travel agency selling vacations, like, all inclusive vacations, because it was I was living on Dr. Penfield and Peel. There was a vacation, travel agency not too far from there. It just all made sense. The problem was, working at a job didn't allow me to go to school concurrently full time. And I realized that if I work, I get paid. If I work, I get paid. I was working for money as opposed to having money work for me. And so if I was sleeping, I wasn't making any money. And if I was in class, I wasn't making any money. So I actually had to quit that job, because it wasn't a bad job. I was able to make a little bit of money, but it didn't allow me to do what I wanted, which was, can I go to school full time? Can I also support myself, tuition, rent, all that stuff, and also send a bunch of money back home for my sisters and my parents, which was really, really important to me. And I couldn't. It didn't work that way. It would force me to do a reduced course load and do a 5-year degree as opposed to a 4-year degree. And then I also began to try different little side hustles, and those didn't really work either. And it was only until a friend of mine who was on the student council at McGill University opened my eyes and said, "Hey, just so you know nothing with the t-shirt industry, and that's okay, but McGill spends like $25,000 a year buying t-shirts. Have you thought about whether or not there's a way for you to get into that business, get into that industry?" And that's kind of how that all started.
Was your, meanwhile, back home, and your family they're in Florida still at this point?
Yeah, they're in Florida at this point. Yeah.
That distance, like, I mean, I know, like, the reason I asked the question is, I grew up very poor, we grew up with nothing. And I remember, because I left home when I was 16. So I'm thinking about the same kind of timing. It's interesting though, like you were 17 when you kind of got into the t-shirt business, and then you got into school, you're in your early 20s, I take it. And that period of time for me was when I had so much kind of self-doubt, but yet I was still always believed that I could solve anything I needed to solve just by working. That if I just applied myself somehow, I could solve the problems that I had in front of me. And it sounds very similar to you. Like you were constantly on the lookout, though. I think you were way more entrepreneurial earlier than I was. Like it sounds like you were always looking for the way to kind of apply your skill set in entrepreneurialism. I didn't realize I was an entrepreneur until I was like 30.
Yeah, one thing that had happened early in my life that I don't often give credit to, but as I get older, and I have two kids, I have two daughters of my own now, I have children now. My dad did this thing. We didn't have very much money either. I actually didn't know that at the time. Because when you're a kid, you don't know if you're rich or poor. There was food on the table and there was roof over the head, and life seemed to be okay. I didn't always have the coolest stuff. Like I didn't have the cool sneakers that other people had always, but I always felt like we had enough. But every time I had a really weird, strange business idea, my dad would go and make me a business card or a set of business cards with that company name on it and my name on it.
Love that.
And seeing the physicality of that, like it's a tangible thing that says Harley Finkelstein, CEO of whatever silly business, that was impactful to me because it felt like he believed in me. He wasn't giving me money because he didn't have very much money. And he wasn't giving me, production facility or manufacturing equipment. He was giving me something that one was very affordable to him, but it was so impactful to me because it allowed me to completely change my view of what this is. It made me feel validated. It made me feel that I was authentically doing this thing. And that type of confidence was something that I want to instill in my own children now. And that doesn't take a lot of money. I know a lot of parents, that have money back their children financially or their kids financially in a business. I didn't have that. The way that he backed me was with giving me confidence.
It's such an important lesson. I mean, I think about, I would say my father was the same in terms of the influence he had in my life around, he didn't have money either, but when I was down at my very worst days, instead of giving me a handout, which he could have easily said, well, here's $5 to kind of get you through the day if you need money. He could have helped, but his whole thing was about giving me a hand up and helping me believe in myself more and giving me the confidence to trust that the solution was inside of me as opposed to looking somewhere else for it. And it sounds like your dad was very similar. I love that business card idea. I'm going to steal that. I think that's awesome.
It sounds, when you hear it, it sounds so simple, but it provides this. I mean, why is it so important? Like, why do you and I angel invest? I've invested, Lindsay and I, my wife and I've invested in like 45 companies. Majority of them are in Canada. I know you've done a lot of that as well. Why do I do that? I do that. Some of these companies, I was very, very early into companies like Skip the Dishes before they got sold. And some of these companies have had incredible returns for me. That is great. But the reason that I do it is because it is less about the capital they provide. It's more about the fact that I am endorsing this idea, this entrepreneur, this founder. I am giving them a little bit of wind in their sails, some sort of light tailwind. And people did that for us at Shopify. John Phillips, our original angel investor, he believed in us when no one else did. And yes, his money and his capital was important, but I would say his guidance and his belief in us was equally as important. So that was the reason why in undergrad, I tried to, okay, let's try this, doesn't work, let's try something else. I didn't necessarily get, I never felt like it was the end of the road, that if this doesn't work, it's over. There was a resiliency to this whole practice of, hey, I want to I want to go to school, I want to make some money, and I want to not have to take a reduced course load. And that's the reason why I think I was able to jump around and eventually find something that made some real money. And what ended up making real money was this t-shirt business that made t-shirts for universities, because frankly, the entire business model of it was, in hindsight, really interesting. The person that signs the checks for the McGill Student Council t-shirt business is not the person paying the bill, which is McGill University. And this idea that there's an interesting sort of agency dynamic where it's a student who procures t-shirts for the whole university, but the university pays for it. But the person who's paying for it needs to has a fiduciary responsibility to the university to get a good deal, but also cares about getting great t-shirts for all of his peers. And I was able to sort of really hack that dynamic in a way that if you were buying t-shirts between 2002 and 2005 for student council at a university across Canada, there was a good chance you were buying from me.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. And I think now that we can get talent from anywhere, where we can now, because of the pandemic and because of what's happened, and the doors have been opened. First of all, the doors have been opened in leaders' minds around the fact that a great person can come from anywhere and work with you collaboratively using tools and digital tools that actually enable conversation, collaboration, and production of ideas into reality. That has created, I think, taken the competitive advantage you just talked about that Canada has and amplified it by 1,000,000 times, because now we can take, this great tight-knit community of people who are really passionate about helping Canada succeed on the world stage and help grow them even more, because they can get talent from anywhere in the world. And I do want to come back to you talking about a 100-year company. I think that is so important, Harley, because so many startups now say, I'm going to run it for a couple of years and I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to be out and I'm going to do the next thing. And they don't understand that really what you need to build it to sustain and to be there for the long term. You may reinvent it over the period of time. You may have to change what it is over time. But if you're building for the long run, then you're building a value that is so intrinsic to our country that you can't even quantify it. It's everything.
Yeah, your time horizon needs to match your level of ambition. And so our ambition is we want to democratize entrepreneurship. We want to level the playing field for anyone that has ambition, anyone that wants to start a business globally. It's a big ambition. That is not a small thing. That's equivalent to Nike saying, we want everyone in the world that has a body to think of themselves as an athlete. This is a brilliant thing, a brilliant idea and concept. What Shopify is trying to do is we want anyone that has ambition to think of themselves as an entrepreneur or to be entrepreneurial about whatever they're doing. Anyone that has a hobby. My grandmother, who's 88 now, she makes the most beautiful these beautiful blankets. She makes them for all the grandkids and great grandkids. I want her to think about commercializing that and making blankets and setting up a Shopify store. So the ambition that we have around Shopify is so big. We need a time horizon that matches that. And the time horizon that matches that, the only one is to do it over a 100-year period, because otherwise you're going to mitigate or reduce your level of ambition.
So let's talk about that for a minute. You have a front row seat. What do you serve, like 1 million businesses now? Is that right? You've got 1 million businesses
over 1 million
on your platform, which is really, huge congrats on that. It's just such an accomplishment, and I'm so proud of Shopify and of you and of Tobias, because I think it's just no small feat. And I love that you think so big, because that's also lacking in Canada. This think big. But back to front row seat that you have. So you see every day all of these businesses, and we're right in the middle of a pandemic, and that pandemic has impacted. Listen, I've seen entrepreneurs be crushed by it so far. I've seen entrepreneurs who are just barely treading water. I've seen entrepreneurs who are hibernating, and I've seen entrepreneurs who have said, wait a minute, there's an opportunity here for me to grow while everyone else is hibernating, stopped, or unsure. What's the difference between those entrepreneurs, and what are you seeing? What are you seeing people doing differently right now?
Well, a couple things there's a couple common denominators. There's this great book by Carol Dweck called Mindset. Almost required reading at Shopify, but Carol talks about sort of the difference of the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And I don't think what is happening around entrepreneurs and small businesses is as simple as some people have fixed mindset, some people have a growth mindset, but there are some elements to that. I think fundamentally, there are some people that look at a tidal wave coming and they run for the shore to grab their towel. And there are others who grab a surfboard. And I think the entrepreneurs that I am watching right now that are not only surviving COVID and the pandemic, but thriving, they unequivocally are resilient. They unequivocally are grabbing their surfboard. They're trying to rethink their entire business model. And my best friend is a guy named Steve Bechta in Ottawa. He's a great iconic Canadian restaurateur. He owns 3 of the best restaurants in the country. When COVID hit in mid-March, he was at our cottage. We were skiing just about an hour north of Ottawa, and we went in. It was a Sunday afternoon. We both were checking Twitter or checking the news, and we just see like everything is closing. This thing is really happening. And that afternoon, we got back, and we were sort of having a beer or something on the deck after skiing. And I looked at him and I said, "You're gonna have to close your restaurants." He's like, "Yeah, I will." I was like, "How is that? How is that okay?" I mean, Shopify, like we may not be able to go to the office anymore, but we're going to keep going. As always. He's like, "Well, I'm going to close my restaurants and I'm going to figure out a way to change my business." Fast forward till today, Steve and the Becta group of restaurants, they have a thriving wine business, a wine membership business. They have a curated by Becta meal kit business. They are completely resilient to the extent that they probably, even post-COVID, will never go back to the way it was previously. And so that's a sort of a small local story. Then you have Gymshark, one of Shopify's largest stores based out of the UK, one of the largest athletic companies on the planet. I mean, they compete with, Under Armour and Nike and Adidas. And the second COVID hit, you went to Gymshark, and all of a sudden it was called Home Shark because they realized all the gyms were closing, and their content, their merchandising, the marketing, branding language they were using all completely changed in a matter of like an hour. And those are the businesses that are doing amazingly well. On the other hand, I think you have a lot of entrepreneurs that, in some cases, it's not their fault. In fact, all the cases, not their fault, but they're waiting for things to go back to the way it was. They are waiting for the return of some sort of normalcy. And rather than grabbing their surfboard and riding the wave, they're just waiting this out. And I don't think they're certainly not thriving. They're barely surviving. And I think that idea of resiliency, not just for your business, but as an individual, like if bad stuff happens, are you going to grab your surfboard? Are you going to have a growth mindset? I think those are the makings of those that are doing well right now.
And bad stuff is going to happen. And
always, for all of us.
Always.
Personally, professionally, emotionally, psychologically, totally. I had a really tough first few months. I've been described by some as a power extrovert, which I think is probably true. Those first few months, March, April, May, not being able to go to the office with my team at Shopify, being at the headquarters, that was difficult. My wife is a food blogger. She owns an ice cream shop. Like we're always out. We're always doing something really fun. We weren't able to do that. I struggled personally, even though professionally, I really felt like I was kind of in my groove. And so I doubled down on my therapy sessions. I doubled down on coaching. I found people in my life that were able to kind of help me navigate all that. And so it's not to say any of this is easy. It's simply going back to mindset and Carol Dweck. It's just a matter of, are you going to take an approach, which is find out what the next move is, given this new information, or are you just going to wait it out? And when you look at, in my world, the amount of big retailers, iconic retailers, Barney's, Neiman Marcus, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, like Bergdorf, out of business. I mean, gone. And so that's sort of high end. On the low end, you have Forever 21 and companies like that also gone. What you realize is that they simply were doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. They were not adding any incremental value. They were not optimizing for a new environment. They were simply using their old strategy and they were playing it out as over and over again. And that's insane.
Well, they're in fact, I would say that their demise happened long before the pandemic. All the pandemic did was
just catalyzed it. Yeah,
that's right. It was happening anyhow. And I think, the only concern I have for, on the reinvention front for these businesses, and not the only concern, because as you said, it's complex and it's multi-layered, but the innovation, if we talk about a innovation, an economy that's founded on innovation, and the idea of that means that there's these very, very early stage companies that were just starting to get their gear going, just right that few 6 months, a year prior to the pandemic hitting. They were, they might have had 1 or 2 employees. They were starting to, understand kind of their roadmap. They were putting together through innovation, through their innovative products and services, an idea. And that idea was just forming. and they got hit. And they're the ones that I am actually most concerned about for our country, because they're the ones that are going to struggle to keep that innovation going. Because funding is harder for them, distribution's harder for them. And I think this is places, not to certainly, although I'll pump Shopify all day long, this is places where companies like Shopify can make such a huge difference if it's a service, if it's a product that they can actually deliver, digitally. I mean, it sped up the digital.
Even service-based, in the first week or two of COVID hitting, we told the company to throw out their plans for 2020. Yeah. We said, we're over 5,000 people. So that's a lot of people throwing out their plans. We said, focus on the things right now that will help businesses survive. And you're correct, which is that, what Shopify delivers is a product to sell a physical thing anywhere, online, offline, on Instagram or Facebook or Amazon or Walmart, but it all feeds back through Shopify. We did gift cards so that service-based businesses like a dry cleaner or a nail salon or a hair salon could sell gift cards to their most loyal customers. Right. We allocated another $200 million of capital. So we had a very large capital program, but we increased by $200 million and opened it up to UK and to Canada beyond the United States. So what we tried to do, and certainly we didn't do it across the board, as much as probably we wanted to, but we did our very best to try to make an impact on what people needed right away. We added something as small as, we have thousands of people using Shopify point of sale in their brick and mortar store. And so we added functionality. They can turn every one of their brick and mortar stores into a fulfillment warehouse, so they can do curbside pickup or local delivery. So what we tried to do is not only be resilient ourselves, but enable others to be resilient too, with capital and product and functionality. And I think that made a difference. At least it felt like it did to us. And what we want to be is, we want to be the entrepreneurship company globally. We want to be synonymous with entrepreneurship. The way to do that is not just to support entrepreneurs in the good times. It's also to unequivocally support them when the world is kind of crumbling all around us. And that to me is why this company and the work we do is for me and for many of us, our life's work.
Going back to you for a minute, Harley, and I'm thinking about the road you've taken and how you got where you are at such a young age. If you had to choose between experience or education, given what you know today, which one of those things would you prioritize? You couldn't do both.
Yeah, experience. And I say that as someone who went to law school. I have an MBA as well. I took that path because in some ways it was the right path. It helped me, but honestly, the best thing I ever did to run a large public company, which is now the largest company in the country, in Canada, wasn't what I learned in business school. It actually was a lot of things that I learned DJing. And I'll just give you an example. One of the most important parts of DJing a party or an event is having a great relationship with the client before the party even starts. If you have a solid relationship with that client before a single guest walks into the venue, there's a really good chance it's going to go well. Right. Because it sets a tone for the relationship. It sets a tone for the dynamic. And that's the same case when we're doing partnerships with Facebook or Walmart. Being a good DJ means reading the crowd and being able to change the music you play based on what the crowd requires at that time. And so if the crowd is listening to hip hop and you can tell that an older crowd is coming on, maybe you should move to disco. And like the ability to quickly ingest new information and quickly make new decisions. I didn't learn that in business school. I learned that DJing bar mitzvahs, 500 bar mitzvahs. And so experience, long answers to your question, but experience for me would be the thing. Now, that being said, I went to like one of the best public high schools in the United States in South Florida. It was called Spanish River. And it's like, at the time it was like top 10 or something, or top 20 in the country. I went to McGill for undergrad. I went to really good schools. I actually didn't know how to write very well until I got to law school. So where I caveat that or add an asterisk to, it's all about experiences. Law school taught me how to write well, how to be more articulate, how to debate, how to critical reason, how to read 4,000 pages, but come out with the one single line that is the most important line out of 4,000 pages. So there are values and assets and tactics that I picked up in school, but it wasn't about getting the degree itself. It was about the experience of being in school that exposed me to those learnings.
Which is really important for the kids right now who are not able to have that same experience, because you make a really good point, which is it's not just life experience as it relates to outside of school. It's also the experience that you get in your career through going to school and having that social connection with everybody. But, I never had the opportunity to go to university. So I had a high school graduation, like I had a high school degree, that's it. But having said that, in fact, my father had a PhD in education. And when I was given a great honor to have several honorary doctorates provided to me, and I'm sure he would have been rolling in his grave, very upset that I didn't actually have to do the hard work.
Yeah, you didn't do the work. Well, you did the hard work. You just did it in a different way.
I did it in a different way
to everyone.
But I have a lot of respect, like I think, of course, I'm going to say that it's experience as well, because I don't have the experience of going to post-secondary school. But I do have, when I listen to you and how articulate you are and how disciplined you are in your approach and how positive and how you take a worldview, those things come from that combination. And I think it's a magical combination of education and experience. But I always will say that experience trumps anything, and this is bad and good. And when people are reinventing themselves, we sometimes forget that those bad experiences we've had actually inform our opportunities into the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got this great privilege to give a talk 2 weeks ago at Harvard Business School, a virtual talk that I gave. And at the end of it, we did sort of this coffee kind of break, and it was sort of an open ask me anything. And a bunch of the students at Harvard Business School were like, well, we'd love to work at Shopify. What should we do? Is it, what kind of GPA do I need to have? And I was like, I don't even care if you go to Harvard or not. I don't even care if you go to school or not. If you want a job at Shopify, what I'm looking for is resourcefulness. Have you started a business? Are you a founder? Did you play for the tennis team, or did you create the tennis team at your school because it didn't exist? Did you participate in a single charity event, or did you build an entire charity because you saw a problem that wasn't being solved well? And maybe that was different. I'm in my mid to late 30s now, so maybe I don't know what it was like 30 years ago running a large public company, but certainly today, I don't think any great company in general cares what your GPA was or if you went to Harvard. I think that's an old paradigm of success. And not to say if you go to Harvard, you probably have the greatest professors, and I'm sure there's a lot of great, the peers in your class are probably really interesting. But I'm looking for resourcefulness more than anything else. And whether you acquire resourcefulness from education or experience, I'm indifferent to that. Although I bias towards that experience. And I also want to know people that have had some struggle in their lives. I at the time, being 17 and having to work and support the family and I didn't have time to go on dates like my friends were, and I wasn't able to go to frosh or orientation like my friends were, or one-on-one week at the first week of school. At the time, that didn't feel great. But in hindsight, it was a lot of that struggle that has given me, I think, some of the character that I think has been valuable.
Yeah, I echo that comment as well. I often look back on my worst days as being the best lessons I've ever learned. What's the hardest thing you've ever done, Harley? What's the hardest thing?
The transition from being Harley the entrepreneur to being Harley the husband, Harley the father has been very challenging for me.
Yeah.
And it's worthwhile mentioning this, and because I'm not ashamed by it. But my wife and I, almost since we got married, we've gone to couples counseling together, and we've now been married for 7 years, and we still go to couples counseling. And part of it was in the same way that as an entrepreneur, I always had mentors and advisors and asked a lot of great questions. I didn't feel like I had a skill set to do that. Transitioning from being an entrepreneur where I'm always so focused, I'm always running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and I'm trying to accomplish and I'm trying to solve problems, to being an empathetic husband. So when Lindsay tells me a problem, now I ask her, do you want me to help you solve this problem, or do you just want me to listen and empathize with you? I know that sounds like a ridiculous lesson.
No, it sounds really familiar. It sounds so familiar.
I couldn't do that. Like I had physiologically, I couldn't just, I had to solve the problem. That transition from in a personal way has been is still very, very challenging. I'm, obsessed with my daughters, and I love them, and they're, the greatest thing is waking up, is waking up and hanging out with them, watching a movie in bed or something like that. It's awesome. But sometimes, I don't know exactly how to show up and who to be with them, and how not to be alpha and type A, and how not to just try to solve everything for them. I would say that's probably one issue. And the second one, which is probably more relevant for this conversation, is I think when I came into Shopify, and this has been, it's been about 11 or 12 years now, I was full of insecurity. I don't think I had a great self-awareness. I don't think I was just like kind of running and doing stuff. And my first couple of hires at Shopify that I had to make, I remember interviewing them, and I didn't want to hire them, not because they weren't good, because I thought they were better than me, and I didn't know what my place would be. And one of the benefits, I think, of getting older is that you begin to shed some of that toxic garbage, especially if you do the work, and if you have coaches and you have therapists and you have great friends and people in your life and family that can help you with that. But those two transitions from being an entrepreneur inside of Shopify to being a leader inside of Shopify, and going from being an entrepreneur at home to being a partner to Lindsay and a great, a good parent to my kids, that those would be that latter one will be the challenge of my lifetime, because I keep falling back into the same sort of rhythm, and it's often not very helpful.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I was, when I kind of was nodding earlier and you said it sounds crazy, all I could think about is it sounds so familiar. I think as entrepreneurs, but what people sometimes miss the point on entrepreneurs is not something you take on and you put on like a coat at the beginning of the day and take off at the end of the day. It is who you are, is intrinsically who you are. It's like saying to us, an athlete, well, stop being an athlete when you go home. Well, of course they can't. Or stop being an artist when you go home. This is who we are as people. And as type A and problem solving people, it is ultimately what we want to do is solve. So, oh, you're not happy? Well, what can I do to fix that? I'll fix that for you. Versus, oh, you actually want to talk to me and have time for me. And
right, you just want me to say that sucks. That one line. Oh, that sucks. It was painful for me to say it. Lindsay, my wife, always says that I cook dinner like an entrepreneur. And I was kind of always a joke. And actually, it turns out what she meant by that was I rushed through the production of dinner. And I'm almost looking for not the minimal viable product, but if I can blanch something versus just quickly chop them up, I'm going to always chop them up fast. And one of the things that has been very valuable to me is now I try to cook dinner a couple times a week. And in a sort of a non-COVID world, I'll go out and I'll go to the farmer's market and I'll pick the vegetables that look really delicious and I'll bring them home. And the experience of just chopping vegetables and spending the time to enjoy making dinner, that is one of the most therapeutic things that I do for myself and for my family now. And in hindsight, her saying I make dinner like an entrepreneur, I thought it was a compliment. It wasn't a compliment. What she was saying is I was just trying to win at making dinner. And I don't want to win at making dinner. I actually want to enjoy the process of making dinner. I don't want to win at being a dad. I want to be a good dad or being a spouse. There are some times where I just want to win, and there's other times where I really want to live in the moment. And maybe that's the third thing that I struggle with is living in the moment. And meditation has been a huge new valuable tool in my toolbox. I've been meditating daily for 3 or 4 years now, and it's just a 15-minute sit, and I just count my breaths, but it makes a big difference. So that's some of the personal work that I'm trying to do right now.
I think I would tell you that all of those things that you've just identified are problems that almost every entrepreneur I know, or challenges that every entrepreneur I know faces. And, living in the moment, that is something I'll potentially, kind of end with this, is that I think as you age, Harley, and as you get older, and I've got the benefit of being able to do this now, being a little bit older than you, is that you do start to learn to slow down a little bit in a different way, not in a non-entrepreneurial way, not in a, but you are more aware and you're self-aware. Now when my daughter says to me, I want to talk to my mom. I don't want to talk to entrepreneur Arlene. I want to talk to my mom. I know what she means now. Like similar conversations. I feel like I've had a parallel experience to yours in many respects. But you have to, it's funny. I started canning recently. And I used to can when I was first.
It's like pickling, right? Kind of stuff.
Yeah, making jam, pickling.
Yeah.
And when I was first married, I've been married twice, and just a quick little point I want to make here. We want to build businesses that last 100 years. We need to figure out how to make marriages that last 100 years and relationships that last 100 years. And entrepreneurs are not really good at that. So that's a little point on the side there. But I used to can and bake bread and do all those things when I was first married because we had no money. We couldn't afford food, right? So I was growing my own food. I was canning. I hated it. I wanted the freedom to be able to go to the store and get whatever I wanted from my family. Fast forward all these years, and now I'm like, oh my God, you think I invented tomato sauce because I'm going to my garden and getting my tomatoes and making it from scratch. And there's this beauty to that kind of slowing down in life because it does give you the most important thing I think entrepreneurs and people need in reinvention, and that is time to think. I find that that's when I can stop and go, oh, I'm not trying to problem solve. I'm just being creative, and in creativity, I'm thinking. So
it feels almost sometimes when you're in that sort of thinking mode, it feels unproductive.
Yes,
it feels and maybe it is sometimes, but it also can be incredibly productive. It means that you take one step backwards, sort of thinking, to take 10 steps forward, as opposed to no steps backwards, but only one step forward. And so I'm beginning to kind of understand that better. I'm also beginning to have different influences in my life. One of the things that I realize is I very much believe that you do become at least some element of the people you surround yourself with. And as far back as I can remember, I surrounded myself with like-minded people that were highly ambitious, that were entrepreneurs, that were building companies, that were super type A. And I began actually to incorporate new people in my life that are not like me. That one was a friend of mine, this guy Mike, who I started doing yoga with a couple of years ago. When he goes for a walk, he looks at he goes for a walk every day. He looks to see how flowers and trees and the grass on his path has changed. And he told me this. I was like, yeah, I'm never going to spend the time to actually notice those changes. But I started doing that. So now when I walk the dog, I notice, well, that's a new flower. And oh, that tree is the leaves have fallen off entirely, or 50% fallen off now, or that person changed their landscaping. And one of the things I recognized from that is I really love going for walks now. I really enjoy it because by doing that noticing practice, it allows me to be more in the moment of it. And here's the cool part as we zoom out. You can be hyper ambitious. You can build, $100 billion or more company. And you can also be mindful, and you can also be patient, and you can also be empathetic. They are not mutually exclusive. And I think for a long time, specifically in my 20s, believe that if I do too much of the mindfulness and too much of the empathy stuff, I'm going to be less aggressive or less confident or less ambitious. And that is just not true. In fact, the two work really nicely hand in hand.
It's a great ending to that. It's all about being a balanced individual and doing all of those things that makes you actually more successful. I have to end with a thank you to you, Harley. You and your wife have been so philanthropic, and you have done so much to help. I mean, it's touching in so many ways. It makes me I don't know why every time I'm on these calls lately, I'm being very emotional, but I feel like, wow, like what you've done is really impressive. So I want to thank you as a Canadian.
Thank you. It's, it feels like, if you have any success, big or small, it feels like you just have to pay it forward. You have to help others. And our version of philanthropy is a bit different than others. I've met some amazing people that have talked to me about the philanthropy, and there are a lot more under the covers. And Lindsay and I like to do things and tell people. And one of the things that we have found, this is our personality, so it's not for everyone, but when we do something, we try to create leverage for it. So rather than simply donating something or donating some money or doing something, we try to create a movement around it, and it creates this 1 + 1 = 3. We get more people involved, and so we've taken an entrepreneurial approach to philanthropy as well, and it's really amazing for us. We feel, there was no synagogue in downtown Ottawa. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and the fact that like a G7 capital didn't have a synagogue felt completely wrong. And so Lindsay and I built the Finkelstein Jewish Center, and I got to tell you, every time I drive by, particularly with my parents or my kids, and we see that, it's unbelievable. It feels so incredible, and it drives us to do more and build more, and a lot of that comes from to turn it entirely around, Arlene, to watching folks like you that have had a lot of success well before I did, and watching how you pay it forward, watching who you invest in, watching who you bring into your life and expose them to things they never would have been exposed to. And I think we should all be doing more of that stuff too. Yeah.
Capitalism with a heart is, I think, fundamentally what the future needs to be about. So, and you demonstrate it in everything you do. And Harley, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I was thinking to myself, between walking the dog, the yoga, the cooking, the business running, the mentorship, like the investing, the angel investing, you probably are filling a day and a half every day. And I appreciate you carving out time for this show, and your words of advice for people on reinvention are great. Is there anything last that you want to leave as last word?
I would say this, the idea of reinvention or the idea of resiliency, it's easy to say. It is not an easy thing to go through. And those people that are listening to this right now who sort of feel like, I know there's another pivot here, personally or professionally, I just don't see it yet. My advice would be just try something. If it doesn't, that's the craziest part about 2020, besides the pandemic, is that entrepreneurship, the barrier to entry is as low as it's ever been. The cost of failure of starting a business today is as low as it's ever been in the history of the world. And the only thing it really costs you is your opportunity cost, is your time. That is so different than when our parents and grandparents were growing up, and to start a business meant mortgaging your house. Mm-hmm. And if a failed business meant losing your house. There's never been an opportunity like there is right now for entrepreneurship, or to try your hand at taking your hobby and commercializing it. If you make amazing bread, or you do canning, post a video of you canning. Maybe someone will be inspired by it, and they'll start canning as well. And now there's a bit of a canning movement happening. That type of stuff, I think, is something that we all should be doing more of right now.
Thanks, Harley. Time flew by, so really appreciate it.
Thanks, Arlene.
Sometimes all we need is for someone to believe in us. And for many entrepreneurs, that person is themselves. Faced with one financial constraint after another growing up, Harley did not sit back and feel sorry for himself. He stayed ambitious, sought opportunity, and made ends meet for both himself and his family. This sort of resilience defines lives and inspires those who are in the same scenario. If you walk away with one key message from this episode, let it be that hard work and dedication is no match for any hardship life will throw your way. Stay safe and stay human. Thanks for listening, everybody.
This podcast is made possible by the great folks at Venture Communications. Thanks to our engineers, writers, producers, and all the folks who work really hard to bring you these great stories of reinventions each and every week.